Mafalda Thayer and Alexis Saborit looked like the perfect couple. When people saw them together, they couldn't help but notice how harmoniously they complemented each other. The two were often spotted strolling the streets of Minneapolis, talking with smiles on their faces, enjoying each other's company. If one were to ask acquaintances or coworkers, they would describe them as people who found their perfect union, built on mutual respect, love, and support. Thayer was a 55-year-old Cuban immigrant who came to the United States with a dream of a better life. She was a woman with a huge heart, loving and caring. Thayer was always sincere and open, never hiding her kindness. Her life was not easy, but she believed that America would give her every chance for a new chapter. And indeed, she made a lot of efforts to get on her feet in a new country, finding a job, gaining people's trust, and making plans for the future. She found her partner in Alexis Saborit, who seemed to be the person with whom she could build a strong and harmonious relationship. Alexis Saborit was a 42-year-old man, reserved, calm, and hardworking. He was also a Cuban immigrant, though with far less experience living in the United States than America. He was a quiet and somewhat reserved man, but his character and kindness was evident in the way he supported his partner. Many people noticed that their relationship seemed quite balanced, with Thayer bringing brightness and joy, and Saborit in turn creating an atmosphere of stability and security. They looked like a couple who were able to find a balance between their differences and create something harmonious together. There were many simple but important moments in their lives. Together they made their plans for the future, worked to improve their financial situation, and tried to make each other happy. They often took walks in the parks of Minneapolis, had dinners together, and just enjoyed every day spent by each other's side. Thayer, despite her hardships, was always content with life, and her kindness attracted many people to her. She was a person who was always looking for an opportunity to help others and was willing to support anyone in need. Her warmth and sincerity created an atmosphere of calm and comfort in her surroundings. Many of Thayer's coworkers, with whom she worked at Dollar Tree and My Pillow, described her as someone who was always happy to help and who was genuinely kind. She was cheerful, always had a smile on her face, never complained, recalled Lori Steiskal, her coworker. She was easy to work with, able to find common ground with everyone. Colleagues remembered how Thayer always lifted the spirits of everyone around her, how she was genuinely interested in what they were doing and offered to help. Wherever she worked, people appreciated her for her kind-heartedness and helpfulness. Thayer's friend, Nikki Kendrick, who knew her for 5 years, also emphasized how Thayer had a knack for making people happy just by her presence. She was a real source of light. She was very easy to be with. She could just walk up and say a few words and you already felt better. She was a woman who always cared about others, Nikki said in an interview with a local publication. Nikki also talked about how Thayer always made little surprises for her coworkers, whether it was a morning coffee or some other gesture of attention. No matter the circumstances, Thayer remained optimistic and friendly, and she captured people's attention with her openness and willingness to help. She believed that the most important thing in life is to be a good person and to give to others what you have no pity for. Thayer said that her family and the support of her loved ones always come first for her. Despite all the difficulties she faced, she never gave up hope and truly believed that everything would be fine in the future. Saborit, although he was a more reserved person, always supported his partner. He was also a man who sought stability and wanted to provide her with a comfortable life. He was more reserved, but you could see the concern for his partner in his actions and behaviors. Their relationship with Thayer was built on mutual respect and genuinely wanting only the best for each other. They did not burden each other with heavy expectations and pressure, but instead allowed each other to be themselves and grow. The couple, despite all of life's challenges, seemed happy. They held hands, walked the streets of Minneapolis, talked about their plans for the future, laughed, and enjoyed life's moments. Those around them often noticed how these two complemented each other harmoniously and seemed to be made for each other. They became an example of how two people could support each other despite possible problems. Even though they had difficult moments in their lives, they always found a way to overcome them together. On July 28, 2021, the day 55-year-old American Mafalda Thayer's life was tragically cut short. It wasn't just tragic events happening in her apartment. At a time when all seemed calm on a Minneapolis street, one neighbor heard strange, disturbing screams coming from next door. These screams disturbed the usual tranquility of the neighborhood and caused the woman to feel uneasy. The neighbor, who lived in the apartment across the street, had known the couple for several years and had often seen them, like many others, happy, out for walks or returning home from shopping. But on this day, something wasn't right. After she heard the piercing screams, she felt a chill run down her spine. She froze for a moment, listening, and the screams only got louder. This was more than just a fight. This was something terrible and horrible. At first, she had tried to ignore them, thinking it was probably just another domestic quarrel between neighbors. However, the screams grew more and more fierce, escalating into something that seemed out of last resort. Something is wrong, she thought. The fear wouldn't let her go. Living in the house next door, she couldn't help but notice that what was happening inside was something far more disturbing. The process of realizing that what was going on could be much more serious took some time. She had seen the couple before, knowing them as polite and nice people, always smiling at each other. And despite the fact that such shouting is usually associated with something else entirely, like domestic quarrels, this time the neighbor felt she couldn't stay indifferent. Without thinking, she quickly picked up the phone, dialed the emergency number, and with a trembling voice told the operator what was happening. "It's something terrible, probably some kind of violent argument," she said, pointing out that on the other side of the wall, where she often saw the couple, there was some strange shouting going on that certainly couldn't be an ordinary domestic disagreement. With excitement, the neighbor could barely articulate her thoughts. Her voice gave away all the anxiety she was trying to hide. The operator, who immediately took the message, promised that patrol cars would be dispatched to the scene. Although she tried to remain calm, her anxiety was evident. She had a feeling that something was not right at all. "Please, quickly," she said one last time before hanging up the phone. On the other side of the door of Thayer and Saborit's apartment, the situation was becoming more and more threatening. The screams the neighbor heard grew louder and then suddenly subsided. This only added to the woman's sense of unease. Everything happened so fast that she didn't have time to realize exactly what had happened, but she was sure that calling the police was necessary. After giving all the statements and descriptions of what she had heard, she spent the remaining minutes in nervous anticipation, not knowing what the police would discover when they arrived. When police arrived on the scene at 2:31 p.m. on July 28, 2021, they were faced with a scene that stunned even the most experienced investigators. The center of attention was 55-year-old Mafalda Thayer, whose body was found in the street next to a car. It was a gruesome and shocking discovery that no one would have expected. Thayer was found with multiple stab wounds lying on the ground. Such a brutal scene of violence shocked everyone present, and the police immediately realized that before them was not just a crime, but a carefully planned and brutal murder. There was no doubt. This was no random violence, but an act that someone had committed with clear intent. The surroundings around the body also drew attention. Her car was parked next to the woman, but nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary when the crime was discovered. However, the very fact that the body was found in such a state immediately indicated that this could have been part of some deeper conflict or personal animosity. At the scene, investigators noticed other details that could be clues in the investigation. Objects that had been moved or damaged, and clutter in the surrounding area, which suggested that Thayer may have tried to resist or been part of some violent confrontation before her death. Police officers began collecting evidence and establishing the circumstances of what happened. What immediately drew attention was the blood evidence, as well as the fact that no weapon was found anywhere at the scene. This reinforced speculation that the perpetrator may have been a close acquaintance of the victim, knew her daily routine, and may have been able to carefully plan his actions. Officers arriving on scene also noted that the surrounding buildings and apartments were fairly close to where the murder occurred. However, at this point, it was difficult to tell who might have witnessed what happened. There was a possibility that some of the neighbors might have heard or seen something that could have helped in the investigation. Surprisingly, however, the street seemed empty at the time, and no local residents came out to assist the police. After the police completed the initial examination of the scene and recorded all the necessary evidence, investigators began gathering information from people who may have known the victim, her life, and her relationship with her partner. This was an important phase of the investigation, as it was clear that the tragedy was not an accident, and the key to unraveling the tragedy could be details that were still unknown. Mafalda Thayer, as it turned out, was not only a good worker, but also a warm-hearted person. Colleagues with whom she shared her daily routine at Dollar Tree and My Pillow described her as a kind, caring person who was always ready to help. However, those who knew her a little more intimately began to notice a change in her behavior in recent months. Thayer had become more withdrawn and tense. The same cheerful person everyone could laugh and talk to now often seemed absorbed in her own thoughts, and her moods became erratic. According to her colleagues, the changes in her behavior were linked to her relationship with Alexis Saborit, her partner with whom she had been living with for the past few years. Although, at first glance, their relationship seemed perfect and they were often seen as a happy couple, more and more people around noticed that her partner had become too controlling. He was heavily involved in her personal affairs, and even when Thayer tried to leave him out of her worries, Alexis constantly interfered in her life, sometimes to the point of aggressive behavior. Store employees and friends with whom she shared her workspace said that she was not in the habit of complaining, but still visibly held back her emotions, which could have been a sign that her relationship with Saborit was becoming increasingly strained.
Who multiple people tell Fox 9 was in a long-term relationship with Thayer, where domestic abuse was a consistent problem.
Lori Steiskal, with whom Thayer worked at Dollar Tree, noted that her coworker had recently begun to look increasingly depressed. Steiskal recalled that Thayer hardly talked about her partner, but sometimes casually let it slip that Alexis had become more in control of her daily activities. This behavior reminded Lori of the signs of a toxic relationship, although Thayer herself did not openly express her worries. At some point, Lori realized that she was actually worried about her colleague and couldn't help but notice how tense she felt around her partner. Eileen Necklin, a coworker, added that although they rarely socialized outside of work, Thayer had always remained friendly but had changed noticeably in recent months. She became more private, Necklin said. I don't think she was happy, but she tried to pretend everything was fine. Eileen also emphasized that she saw Alexis often show signs of control over her life, which made her anxious. He constantly interfered in her conversations, tried to control her actions, and, whenever possible, offered opinions on what she should or shouldn't do. All this said that despite the outward picture of a perfect couple, the relationship between them was becoming increasingly destructive. Neighbors also noticed odd moments in Alexis's behavior, even though he was always friendly with them. One of the most striking observations was that Alexis seemed increasingly nervous lately. He was increasingly asking questions that perplexed those around him. For example, he wondered where Thayer spent her free time, who she was dating, and tried to restrict her freedom. This was strange, considering that he had not previously shown such signs of jealousy and control. At first, many took his behavior as a show of caring, but it soon became clear that it was more of an attempt to subjugate her. As investigators began to look more closely at the information they received from Thayer's colleagues and friends, they realized that the warning signs pointed to one man, Alexis Saborit. This was not just an intuitive guess, but a logical conclusion based on the facts and evidence gathered. He was someone who could not only physically, but also psychologically suppress his partner, turning her life into an unbearable existence. Given the fact that their relationship had become intensely strained in recent months, and Alexis himself was becoming increasingly aggressive, police began doing everything they could to find out more about his past and behavior. Investigators turned to information about his background. Saborit had previously been convicted of domestic violence. This discovery was a turning point for the investigation because it indicated that he had a pattern of violent behavior in relationships, which, as it has now become apparent, may have led to Thayer's death as well. His past with violence and psychological pressure now came into full context of what was happening. The police decided it was important to talk to him and uncover all the details of his relationship with Thayer. Each new piece of evidence, each new interview with coworkers and friends only confirmed that Alexis was not a random figure in this tragic incident. He was the center around which everything revolved, and it was probably his violent actions that led to Thayer's death.
Court records reveal the suspect was convicted on domestic assault charges in 2017.
The police soon focused all their attention on Alexis Saborit as the prime suspect in the murder of his partner. Confirmations of his aggressive and controlling behavior, as well as his domestic violence convictions, made him the primary focus of the investigation. Investigators decided that a deeper investigation into his personality and psychological state was necessary to understand exactly how he may have been connected to this horrific crime. Once investigators, having gathered all the necessary evidence and testimony from Mafalda Thayer's co-workers and friends in America, began to focus on her partner, Alexis Saborit, they began the next important step, attempting to contact him to get his version of events. However, attempts to reach the suspect immediately became problematic. This raised serious concerns for the police and was the key point that confirmed their suspicions. Investigators began with the usual procedures. Several attempts to contact Saborit through his cell phone. However, each time the calls were not answered by Alexis himself or anyone he knew, which alerted the police. All of his cell phones appeared to be either turned off or out of range. This suggested that he was deliberately hiding, avoiding communication with the authorities. At times like this, when a person in an investigative situation refuses to contact the police, it is often seen as an attempt to avoid responsibility. That's when it became clear that Saborit was likely aware that the investigation was increasingly focusing on him, and he was likely trying to hide. Investigators then turned to surveillance cameras in the neighborhood where the murder occurred, as well as those that may have captured Alexis's movements after Thayer's body was discovered. Video from cameras around the scene and in nearby neighborhoods began to give police officers important clues. First, they found several recordings that showed a man who strongly resembled Saborit moving in a direction opposite the scene. These recordings and the times they were made coincided with the moment police discovered Thayer's body. For the investigation, this footage was an important moment. They showed that Alexis Saborit left the area of the incident shortly before police arrived on the scene. The videos showed his movements and at what point he disappeared from surveillance cameras, which confirmed his attempts to flee. This moment was a turning point in the case. His lack of communication and the camera footage discovered beyond recognition indicated that he was attempting to evade justice. Knowing that apprehending the suspect could be difficult, police intensified their search efforts. They had another crucial element at their disposal: a description of Saborit's vehicle. After discovering his car on video, investigators immediately assumed information about its model and license plate number. That became the next phase of the search that led to his whereabouts. A few days after initial attempts to contact Saborit, police were able to locate his car parked in a Minneapolis neighborhood. It was parked in a fairly secluded location with no visible signs of his presence. At this point, however, police began to proceed with extra caution because arresting a suspect who was violent could be dangerous. Investigators, in conjunction with police patrol officers, organized an ambush. They thoroughly checked the area and nearby neighborhoods to make sure they didn't miss the suspect. Realizing that Saborit could not only be in hiding, but could also attempt to escape or even resist, law enforcement officers were determined to act in the most coordinated manner possible. After several hours of surveillance, as the time was approaching evening, one of the officers noticed a man matching Saborit's description, exiting a building not far from his vehicle. He moved toward the street, answering phone calls as he went. Police responded quickly, surrounding him on several sides. Alexis made no attempt to flee or hide, and his arrest was unopposed. He was detained right on the street, and law enforcement immediately informed him that he was being held on suspicion of murdering his partner, Mafalda Thayer. Saborit was surprised, but his face remained calm, as if he had been expecting this moment to come for a long time. After his arrest, police continued to gather information about his whereabouts and behavior over the past few days. Saborit was taken to the station where he was questioned. According to investigators, he was not particularly aggressive, but refused to testify in the case. This silence only confirmed police fears that he was willing to cover up his guilt. After considering all the circumstances, including his evasion of contact and attempts to avoid responsibility, investigators concluded that Alexis Saborit could not only have been involved in the murder, but was also preparing to abscond. His secrecy, irresponsibility, and behavior after the crime were the signs that pointed to his potential culpability in the terrible tragedy. These events became pivotal to the criminal investigation, and police soon turned the case over to the prosecutor's office, where the decision was made to file second-degree murder charges against Saborit. Following the arrest of Alexis Saborit, the case of Mafalda Thayer's death continues to be under investigation and trial. Although the investigation has been completed and the suspect has been formally charged, Many issues in the case remain unclear and will be clarified during the trial. Alexis Saborit is currently being held in the Scott County Jail, where he is awaiting the start of his trial. He has been charged with second-degree murder, which suggests he was directly involved in Thayer's death. But the second-degree murder charge, unlike the first, does not involve premeditation or pre-planned murder. This charge is based on evidence indicating that Saborit caused his partner's death during a conflict, but with no clear indication that he premeditated her murder. Alexis Saborit is currently in custody without the possibility of bail, reflecting the seriousness of the charges and the possible risks associated with his possible flight or destruction of evidence. In recent weeks since his arrest, the defendant's lawyers have begun preparing his defense, arguing that Saborit is not fully responsible for what happened, citing his psychological state and possibly unstable personal situation. Nevertheless, investigators and prosecutors believe they have enough evidence to prove Saborit's guilt in Thayer's murder. Surveillance cameras, testimonies from coworkers and friends of the deceased, and recovered materials that speak to his secrecy after the crime are crucial elements in the investigation. Police are confident that the incident was not accidental, and that the suspect was deliberately trying to cover up his role in the tragedy. All attention is now focused on preparing for the trial, which is expected to begin in the coming months. The defenders of the accused say he intends to fight the charges and prove his innocence. At the same time, the public and the dead woman's family expect a fair trial and punishment for whoever caused the death of a defenseless woman. America Thayer's death shocked many who knew her, and the investigation into the case drew the attention of locals and the general public alike. In time, as the case moves toward trial, new details will emerge that may help shed light on the motivation of the perpetrator. Whether Saborit will be acquitted or found guilty remains a question that only the court will answer for now. Either way, America Thayer's tragic death is a reminder of the seriousness of relationship violence and its devastating effects on victims. The entire story of this crime was a true warning of the importance of intervention and support for those in similar situations, as well as the need to keep women and men safe in abusive relationships.